Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Lindsey Byrd in Writing is Hard. Today's interview goes over the topic of unusual pathways to publishing. Not writing a book and querying an agent, but rather getting involved in pitch wars and having an agent come to you. We also talk about children's literature and the need for more children's books on diversity. I hope you enjoy. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Today's author interview is with Jess Callans, a queer children's author and illustrator who lives just outside of Philadelphia with his partner and 4 kids. Jess's 2025 debut novel was just published on April 8th and is called Ollie in Between. Its back of book blurb reads, "Puberty, aka the ultimate biological predator, is driving a wedge between soon-to-be 13-year-old Ollie Thompson and their lifelong friends. Too much of a girl for their neighborhood hockey team, but not girly enough for their boy-crazed BFF, Ollie doesn't know where they fit in, and their usual ability to camouflage woefully disrupted. When a school project asks them to write an essay on what it means to be a woman, and if anyone's got an answer, that'd be great, and one of their new friends is the target of bullying. Ollie is caught between the safety of fleeing from their own differences or confronting the risks of fighting to take their own path forward. So to start us off, what inspired you to write this story?
Yeah, so when I started writing Ollie, I was in an MFA program taking a middle grade novel writing course for which we had to read Are You There, God It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. And pretty quickly after starting reading, I found myself back into being like a fourth or fifth grader, picking this book up in the library because it wasn't like required school reading for a while. It was like sex ed required content in some schools. Um, and I had read through it and found myself totally mortified by this idea that like my classmates might be excited about the idea of like getting their period or the whole like we must increase our bust thing. I was like, wait, I am not excited for this. And I did a little bit of reading and looking around trying to see like were there other takes on, like a Are You There, God It's Me, Margaret conversations more specifically about puberty. And there were some cultural conversations about periods in middle grade novels, but there weren't very many, and there were none for queer kids or trans kids. So it felt like pretty clear to me that it was a conversation that like, I could have benefited from. I could have benefited from knowing that like my experience, not just like dreading puberty, which I knew plenty of cis people who I had spoken with who felt the same way, but like looking at the end game of puberty and being like, this isn't right for me. That those kids also deserve to feel like that's like an okay anxiety. It's not an abnormal anxiety. It's not a problem anxiety. Part of hitting puberty and growing up is to be full of anxieties about the future. But for I think a lot of trans and non-binary kids, it's not a path that's laid out in front of them the way it is for a cis person looking at their puberty and looking at the outcome of their puberty. You're anxious about a path that is at least mapped. And so I wanted to put it out there for kids to just have this chance to say, like, okay, people have this is a traveled path, and people come out on the other side. Maybe not Ollie at the end of the novel, but me certainly, because I was this 12-year-old who traveled this path, and then here I am, an adult. I wrote a book. It can be okay.
As an adult, reflecting backwards on puberty, we have the benefit of hindsight in the sense that we've been through it, we know what it's like, and we also know what it's like on the other side. But I remember when it was my time to go through it, um, being told by an adult it's all going to be okay kind of felt very trite. So when you're writing a book that's speaking to those children in that moment of their life, how do you try to get that message across where they can feel that and actually feel the truth of that state?
Yeah, I think the approach that I took in Ollie specifically was not so much like it'll be okay, let me tell you that, and more letting Ollie's anxieties be met on all angles from people being like, yeah, totally. I was worried about that too. even if those people were not adults that Ollie would want to necessarily grow into. But really, most of the anxieties that Ollie brings up, somebody else is there to say, oh man, me too. And I think kind of the first step to realizing like you can be okay is to realize you're not isolated in the experience that you're having. And from there, I tried to include adults. I included a scene going into a library where Ollie does have this realization as they're like looking at books on a shelf that like, okay, maybe I personally have never, to my, to Ollie's knowledge, they have never met a trans adult or a non-binary adult, but they look on the bookshelf and they see queer stories, and it occurs to them that these stories are actually probably written by queer adults. And so somebody makes it, people do make it, and they can be okay. And not only are they okay, but they're okay enough that they want to sit down and talk about it. And so I tried to kind of leave that very much to Ollie exploring that even if they're still not sure that it's going to be like perfect, that people made it through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's such an important thing about that validation of being heard, of knowing that there's someone else there, someone else who can listen to you, that you're not just the magic unicorn in the forest that has no one else that's like you. No one else has seen you before. You were all by yourself. Like knowing that there is someone else and knowing that your experience is not alone is such a validating experience. It's such a comforting experience as well. Which especially during puberty can be very necessary for a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree. I think we turn very inward too in the moments of like our greatest despair. Like the last thing we want to do is hand it to somebody else. So it it becomes more challenging, I think, to connect and have those like genuine moments of like, oh, me as well, because we don't often hand somebody, our most vulnerable selves for them to say that to, because the last thing we want is for them to say, oh, really.
Yeah. When you're writing a character that's experiencing all of these different types of anxieties, what type of care or what type of focus do you put on to make sure that this particular character or other characters within the book um, are reflective of not only reality, but also maybe potentially where someone could go to for help if they were in a similar situation to Ollie?
Yeah, and I think this is like so different across age ranges too. Like there's a different approach in young adult than in middle grade. And for middle grade, I was tried to be really careful as I approached particularly more like dangerous topics where, Ollie does have some self-harm thoughts, but Ollie experiences a lot of panic attacks. And I had another character who also had, theoretically at some point experienced panic attacks who offers them clementines randomly as they are like dealing with this, because your brain has a hard time like processing panic while you're eating something sour. And it was just kind
Really?
of information passed, yeah, from one character to another. And so it's like I tried to include little moments where either, Ollie learns something about how they can cope, or somebody else comes in and, without making a big like, let me introduce you to this coping skill. It's just like, oh hey, here, try this, and they move on. So there are I was careful to include, paths to get help. I included like PFLAG, which is an organization for, family members of queer people, and I'll actually a lot of middle grade novels talk about PFLAG. And so I think it is important to put those things in there so that kids develop language, not only for like their internal processing of those feelings, but also if they did want to reach out or talk to a friend or talk to somebody else, where they could, bring it up through a book or say, I heard about PFLAG. Like, do you know if we have a chapter? I don't know what I'm talking about, but like they could kind of bring something up to gauge what resources are there for them and maybe the feelings of people around them.
When did you first start writing, Ollie?
I started writing Ollie in the winter of 2021. So it was a while ago now. A very different world
It's
than
a
right
very
now.
different world. Were you still in
Yeah.
lockdown then, or were you guys just out of it?
We were, I think it had eased up over that summer, like the end of the 2020 year. No, I'm sorry. I guess we had one, we were still in lockdown. Yeah, we were still locked down for most of 2021 because we moved mid 2021 as well. And it was quite chaotic. Yeah, wow, what a different time.
A very different time. When you're getting ready to write a book, or at least when you were first starting to write this book, why did you decide, you know what, I'm going to write this book right now in the middle of all this chaos?
Um, I have the worst answer to that question because it was a homework assignment. I had to write the first 30 pages of a middle grade novel for the class, and I was like, okay, I guess I will like write my Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, for this class. And my teacher was just sort of like, you should finish that. So I did.
Did those first 30 pages stick around?
Yeah, that's actually very little changed from those first 30 pages.
I remember when we just started talking about sitting down for this interview, you said you had a slightly odd path to publishing, and it sounds like this might be where that started. Can you give us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I just wasn't a big writer. I wasn't a big reader. I had failed English like truly my whole life, and I didn't take any creative writing like classes in college until the very end of my college, like whatever process. And I was kind of forced into a creative writing course that I didn't want to take, and found that I was in not only a creative writing course, but a like final creative writing course for English majors who had all done 4 years of English
How did
work.
you get
And
into that
so
class? Like that
it
seems
was
like a
not
weird way to jump in.
it was not a high, like it was an elective. It was like a 100 level elective, but the way that the cycle, like the class cycle was, it just happened to be that all of these people just took this class together so that they could have a creative writing course to like fill a portfolio up before they graduated. And but it ended up being such a good experience, and it's why my approach to writing came more from a teaching angle, because I wasn't writing well, obviously, when I started in this course, but I was good at critiquing. And I had learned, and I sat down and I was like, oh, I actually can sit and read these people's work and kind of get what they're going for and talk to them about it. And so that was the first thing that the teacher was like, I get that you didn't want to be in this class, which is actually really good at giving feedback, and not just from a literary perspective, but from a personal perspective, like understanding what a person is trying to do and giving them feedback that helps that, not just because I didn't have a literary background. I couldn't be like, well, it would be better if it sounded more like this fancy author. I just didn't really read that much. And so that was my start into writing. And from there, it was just taking these courses and getting my MFA, which I really only did because I loved giving feedback so much. I was like, it'd be so cool to teach writing. But I didn't think I was going to publish. So I hadn't met very many people along my publishing journey who they weren't really trying to publish anything at any point. And this was the first like real attempt that I made at writing a novel. I had written a bunch of something before that, and my teacher was like, no, just pause and finish writing this. And that was, like I said, in like 2021. And then at the end of that summer, there was a Pitch Wars competition, which is like a mentorship. So you submit your novel and a query letter and a synopsis, same you would with like an agent. And if they like it, they'll request the whole thing, and you could win potentially a mentorship with 2 published authors or a published author. And at the end of Pitch Wars, you get put on a website, and agents come and request you from there. So it kind of like flips that experience. And I didn't think I was going to get in. First of all, because I had just written it like right before the summer. I had finished those 30 pages. So I finished writing the whole novel over the summer and kind of gave my draft to Pitch Wars because I just didn't have time. And my teacher really wanted me to do it. And she is an amazing author as well. So I just listened to everything she tells me to do. So word to the wise, if you have a lovely author telling you to do things, just do it. And I got in, and that was like wild. And I got to revise my novel, and I got to put it up, and then agents came to me and requested my novel from me, and I ended up with 8 agent requests, and I got to take calls and pick and choose, and I got an agent who was my dream agent from the start. But I think it is just like a different path into publishing, because publishing was never the path that I was trying to go towards. So I didn't know anything about finding an agent, and I had never queried, and I had never done any of these things before not having to do them and just kind of putting my book out there. So it's really a lot of good luck on my part. there. And I mean, also a lot of hard work because I was having children at the time and had family to juggle. But yeah, I'm glad to be on this end where I'm equally clueless and confused, but at least there's a book out there now.
Was it odd when you began in interacting with the writing community, having such a different experience from the other people around you?
It was, and I also wasn't aware of how different it was until I started interacting more with people in the writing community, particularly my like cohort of other middle grade authors and pitch wars, two of whom are 2025 debuts as well, which is really exciting. And they were talking about getting closer to querying, and they were like, "Oh, who's on your query list?" And I was like, what? Like my what? I don't have that. And they were like, well, do you know what agents you like? And I was like, well, how do you know agents if you haven't had an agent? And they're like, what are you talking about? It's like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I just kind of am like waking up every day and like doing the work part, but I without any awareness of like the industry or publishing or anything. And none of the language. And so it was odd. And then I think at a certain point it just kind of became funny to everyone else because they'd be like, hey Jess, do you know that this thing comes next? And I'd be like, no, thanks for letting me know though. And my publishers have yet to be totally clued in on that. Like my agent really knows now that she has to explain a lot of things to me. My publishers have not figured that out. So I found myself in many spaces where I'm like, they're like, go here and do this. And I'm like, great, do. And I walk in and I'm like, this is really professional. And they're like, yeah, what did you think it was? I don't know. I don't know what anything is here. I'm just like, I'm happy to be alive. I'm not sure what to tell you.
How did you familiarize yourself with everything else that everyone else had come through? So the querying, the ideas of querying, ideas of the publishing stuff, how did you slowly start getting your information from there?
Um, Asking questions, and I'm only now learning to think more about the questions I need to ask because I think a lot of it was I had just accepted the phase of life that I was in at that time. I mean, we had our third kid in the summer of 2021 and our fourth kid in the fall of 2022. So just like that being the phase of life, and I had two other kids who are quite young. My kids are 8, 5, 3, and 2 right now. So like a lot of people to take care of at home. That sometimes I just wasn't going to know. And luckily, my little kind of pitch wars cohort were very aware of that. And so they were so kind and so loving and very thoughtful to just be like, hey, just so you know, like, here's kind of the next thing. Um, as we were going through all of those steps, I guess. And then after that, I mean, it was just like once you get an agent, the conversation is I should theoretically be very open and honest. And I was like really upfront with my agent. I was like, my life looks this way. And we had just found out we were having our third or our fourth before I got the agent. And so I was like, this is not a world I'm familiar with. And I'm also, I mean, I have ADHD and I exist sometimes just like in a land in the clouds. And that doesn't always occur to me like that I need more information. And it's usually fine if I don't have it, I can figure it out. But I had that conversation with her and I was very open with her about it. And she was like, great, no, like I'll make sure if there's a question that I think you might want to ask, like I'll ask it or I'll let you know. And so hopefully for anybody else who is like in that phase of life or just generally has a brain like this, that once you get to the agenting part of it, like you can have that conversation. Before that, either do a lot of research or get to know some really wonderful human beings who are able to guide you with their own experience. And I think I also have a willingness to really hear people tell me when I am totally wrong. Um, and that was helpful for me because I'd be like, oh, I had just assumed this, and people would be like, no. But, all right, I'm not going to argue. Like you tell me why I'm wrong because I don't know why I think this thing that I'm thinking anyway.
Who were your mentors in the pitch wars?
AJ Sass, who wrote Anna on the Edge and Ellen Outside the Lines and all sorts of other beautiful books, and Nicole Melleby, who has also so many books. I think How to Be a Planet is the one that had come out at the time, but they also did the This Is Our Rainbow anthology. And I felt so lucky to have them as mentors too, because AJ Sass was actually somebody who I talked to when I was in that middle grade class, writing my draft for Ollie. I had reached out to them on Instagram just to interview them for a project that I was doing in that class, kind of categorizing what books, in middle grade could even kind of fit gender questioning, children, I guess. There were just really not many. And AJ Sass was one of the books. And I mean, Melissa by Alex Chino was out, and Kyle Lukov had not yet released Too Bright to See at that time. So those were the only ones that I could find. And so I had this like previous conversation with him. So it ended up being like really exciting when that is who I got matched with for that mentorship.
What type of mentoring did they give you, and how did that help Ollie, or just in general your writing improve?
So it was a full novel revision that I got to do with them, which is huge. And I think typically Pitch Wars mentees do 2 full novel revisions, but again, I could not do it with the children that I had in my house, and it was over the holidays. But I was able to get one like really big revision, and then like play around with the ending and get help with my query letter. And that I think, like any part of this process, like if you work with a good editor, you'll definitely develop your writing. But I think sometimes what ends up being more important is that you develop your process. And I learned a lot about my process in that time, because I really had just drafted it and given it to them, and then they, helped me pull the draft together. And I learned, how to edit a whole novel rather than how to edit pages. And I think we all quickly get very good at editing pages. And I think the editing of like the developmental edits, like editing a scene or bringing a character arc, to feel more fluid or more natural, or a secondary character being more fleshed out, those things are really hard. And so they were very like open with me about, how do you from start to finish flesh out this character without editing pages you don't need to edit. And I think those were the skills that I developed more than anything in that time.
What was one of the biggest changes that happened between your first draft of Ollie and the draft that you actually submitted to your agent? Or sorry, because of the Pitch Wars things, I'm going through my own experience. But when you actually were in that final thing and the agent was coming to you to look at your draft?
I think the secondary characters, the queer book club characters, made a much bigger appearance, which I'm so thankful for, because they were really like these little blips. My book was also only 32,000 words when I submitted it to Pitch Wars, and then at the end, I think it was 47,000 words. So really, like, not as much changed in the individual scenes. It was a lot more like, okay, this needs more. This character needs to exist more. So yeah, it was really adding scenes and adding the secondary characters so that they could, or adding scenes with the secondary characters so that they could feel more substantial and important in the story, not just in Ollie's life.
What is a good word count for people who are aiming for your particular age bracket, that they should be aiming for, at least in the first draft, and then maybe when they're actually going on query or submission?
For drafting, that's, I think, really depends on how you draft. Like, I know a lot of people would like prefer to overdraft and then cut. And I don't know really what I prefer, but I think I tend to underdraft because I just want to get to the end. And then I know, okay, here's where I can add more. And so for me personally, I'd rather have a short draft and revise that. But for middle grade, I think like the 45,000 words is kind of like gonna give you, an Ollie size book, about that thick of a book. It's gonna fall on me. But I am getting the sense that publishers across ages right now are looking for shorter novels. So I would say, if you have a short novel don't add anything to a novel that you don't think it needs. Like you're so much better off submitting something shorter and then an agent picking it up and working with you and being like, oh, we should add more here, or you'll get, revise and resubmits, or just hopefully some sort of feedback from agents or editors telling you this is what you need. But I think you're more likely to get people reading a shorter draft or a shorter submission than like a really, really long one. But that's just my opinion.
So at the end of Pitch Wars, agents come to you. What was that experience like?
It was really surreal. Again, particularly coming into it as somebody who I didn't really start writing this novel thinking I was going to finish it. And it was only like literally like a calendar year from me having to, or not even a calendar year from me having written that like first sentence conceiving of this novel. And I hadn't considered querying or submitting. I wrote books mostly because I enjoyed writing. And I thought I probably had to publish something if I was going to teach. That was kind of my mindset. I was like, I have to find something to put out in the world so I can be a teacher. And so then, my book got like a lot more attention than I had thought it was going to get, which was a little intimidating because for me, I was like, okay, is this just because it's a trans thing? Which you're like, yay, people are interested, but there is, and I don't know if like other like minority groups in that sense feel this way, but sometimes when you get a lot of attention, you're like, did they just see a flashy word? And they were like, oh, that could be, useful. But I ended up getting like 54 requests for my chapters at least. And from that, I got 8 people who offered to represent me. And it was good. It was like a validating moment where I was like, okay, like you can do this. Like maybe this is something you enjoy as well. Because I went in with really low expectations through across the board. I submitted thinking I wasn't gonna get in, and I did it thinking like, I don't know if I'll get an agent, from this, but at least I got to edit this draft, and to go and then actually get to this point where I'm like, oh, I get to pick an agent now. Really surpassed the bar that I had set for what I thought I was going to get out of the experience.
You said you got 8 agents that had given you offers. What made you choose to go with the agent you eventually went with?
Yeah, I picked Beth Phelan, and I went with her because she was actually the only agent whose name, this isn't why I picked her. She was the only agent whose name I knew from the start, because she ran the DV pit and she did just so much work for like uplifting diverse authors, particularly unpublished diverse authors, to try and offer them pathways to reaching agents when, it is not always very easy when your book doesn't feel like mainstream content. And so I knew her from that. I also knew her because she publishes Case and Callender's books, and Kaysen writes really beautiful queer middle grade and young adult novels. And so I did know who she was and I knew what she did. But when it came to like picking, and there were 2 other agents who I really, really enjoyed as well, I just had a lot of confidence in like Beth's genuine interest in like lifting up diverse experiences, not because they're like, yay, diversity, like it sounds good to say this, but because she really cared and cared for them to come out in ways that were honest. So maybe not always mainstream appeal, and ways that were like deeply genuine. So a lot of the questions she asked me made it clear that like she wanted to make sure that whatever Ollie's story was remained very intact and uncensored by, somebody saying, oh, but it might be more interesting if, there was more tension or more drama or whatever. Like she clearly understood me as an author and my goal to represent a character who was meaningful to me. And so that's why I ended up picking her. Although the other 2 agents who I had narrowed it down to, I think they would have done a lovely job too. So it can be hard.
When you started transitioning from your, shall we say, different publishing journey into a more traditional one where now you have the agent, it's time to actually go and find the publisher. what was that transition like? Was it surprising? Were you being given feedback on how the process was going to go? Were you surprised by anything?
Um, I no, I mean it felt like a pretty straightforward process from there. I did some revisions with Beth, and those revisions were very consistent with the content that I had been working on with the mentors, where it was like I had in my first my Pitch Wars revision, I had added in these oh my goodness, characters. And then with Beth, we really sat down and we were like, okay, how do we make them feel very concrete in this world? The ending changed a couple times. And then going on submission felt mysterious, but I get the sense that it feels a little mysterious for most people, because you just kind of send it out there and you're like, well, hope an editor likes that. And then my other, I guess, like a little less traditional part of that is that the editor that I worked with was an editor that I actually took a highlights workshop with, um, like a very long time ago, and had this content in her highlights course. And so she had like an awareness that it would exist at some point, and we submitted it to her because she was a good person for it, but because she wanted it too. So there was this little like road there that I knew there was somebody sitting there who was kind of like, give it to me. And that is who I ended up working with. Uh, so I don't know that that's also pretty standard for folks. I just got very lucky very many times.
I am curious, did you tell your teacher who originally gave you the homework assignment that you got this book deal and that it's coming out and it's going to get published?
Well, yes. And so my teacher is like a Newbery Award-winning middle grade author, and so she has helped me uh, do my. She did my launch event, and she was my teacher for other classes too, and she was my thesis advisor. So all of this was happening like while she was still in my life, and she knows I like to joke that I came into the program thinking I was going to write like very literary adult fiction, and then I was aggressively bullied by somebody who initially I didn't know who she was, because she was like, do this thing. And then I Googled her because I was like, I don't like being bossed around by people. And I looked her up and I was like, okay, I will listen to her. Her name is Erin Entrada Kelly. And her books are beautiful. And I was so lucky to have her as an influence in my life. But it was my initial like read of her was like, this is some mean bossy lady. I don't know why she wants me to write for children. Um, so yeah, that the whole process has been so kind of funny for me, which doesn't help the like fugue state that I feel I'm always in as I enter events. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I don't even know how I got here. Like, I truly just feel like sometimes I woke up and I'm like, oh wow, this is so cool. And you forget, like, again, with four kids, like my day to day is so mundane. Like I'm just having arguments about like cheese slices all day, and I'm like picking kids up from school and trying to like convince them that they need to wear underwear. And that's like all my whole day is that. And then, you know, I'll have an event or I'll have something and I go into it and I'm like, oh my God, like I have a career that I just can't even remember on the day to day of like strange toddler demands.
You said that you were thinking about originally doing adult lit. Besides having a Newbery Award-winning author demanding that you write children's lit, first off, why did you think that you wanted to do adult in the first place? And then what made you feel really good about being a children's author?
Yeah, I started in the adult space because I took a creative writing course with very literary English majors in their final year of, you know, their final year of their English program. And so it was just like a lot of like highly literary people. And I was like, I guess this is what we do. Like this is what one aspires to be. And I was also reading a lot of Bret Easton Ellis, and the only author who I really read as a high schooler was Chuck Palahniuk, which, you know, give or take people's opinions on him. I really liked Invisible Monsters, and he and Bret Easton Ellis both have these very like minimalist, kind of dreamy, punchy ways of writing. And so I was like, I am not a deeply flowery person, which might be hard to believe if you read Ollie as like a little bit flowery and full of metaphors, but it was it developed out of this very minimal, punchy style that I thought I wanted to write in. But what I brought to her class, she was like, this would be cooler as YA. I was like, well, I didn't read YA because I wasn't reading at that time in my life. And really, I think I thought I wanted to write adult because I never read anything else. And I wasn't highly impacted by fiction as a child. I was highly impacted by my own fiction, but I was very much a movie person and a TV show person. And so stories to me were something you consumed, and they lived in your brain, and it wasn't something you wrote down, and it wasn't something you read. And I hadn't had the encouragement really from teachers to find books that I wanted to read outside of what I was made to read in school. And Erin mailed me books to my house, and I read them. She was like, I think you probably would like young adult, if you read it. And she mailed me books, and she also suggested like a love story by Abdi Nazemian, which is like a beautiful queer story, and it's got Persian characters. And I was reading it, and I was like, oh my God, like, wait, like I could be in a book. I had no, like, even as a full adult, I was like, I clearly exist outside of fiction too. So I didn't want to engage in it. So just the awareness that people were writing stories I could relate to, like, opened up this whole realm of possibility that I could actually write stories that I wanted to write for kids. And the more I read young adult and the more I read middle grade, the more I noticed the honesty that came from these characters and from their experiences, and how universal the adolescent experience is, even as an adult. Even reading children who are experiencing things, I have no context to like attach to my own life. It was so easy to connect, and I felt like that took a special kind of skill that I wanted to have, because if you can't tell, I'm not very, like, brevity is not my strong suit. But you have to have that, when you're writing middle grade, and you have to have honesty that doesn't feel like a grown-up telling you what to do. And you also have to have what I do think I had going into it, which is a very deep connection with your adolescence. And having been aware as a child that I did want to be a boy, like I was not a girl the way other people were a girl. I could very easily like landmark so much of my adolescence and remember through those landmarks. Like I remember exactly how I felt and certain conversations that I had. And so it became very easy for me to inhabit not just like the events of adolescence, but those feelings that you have when adults are talking to you. And it made me really want to bring those stories to kids and to young adults more than I did for adults at that point, because I don't know, I had no reason to want to write for adults in the first place. It just felt like the thing I probably had to do if I wanted to write something.
Have you thought of, I know when you first started, you said that you just wanted to be a teacher. Have you thought of like, no, I'm also now an author and I want to write more? And have you thought of what that more might look like?
Yeah, I mean, so the teaching is not happening yet because, again, there are lots of children in my house. But there's like, I'm trying to do a little bit of community teaching, and I've done some workshops and classes, and that'll be fun. I only recently have started calling myself an author, mostly because my friends are like, you should just say that now. Because it does feel very strange. And I don't know if you have that feeling as well, where it, like, for so long, I like didn't even call myself a writer because it just felt like, again, like something you were supposed to say if you knew you were going to publish. And I was not sure I would ever really publish. And so I call myself that now, and it feels good. I'm like, I do want to write more books, and I have another middle grade novel that's a middle grade horror.
Ooh.
Hope to, yeah, bring into the world at some point. It's not with my agent yet, and I'm wrapping up what will hopefully be my next book to go out on sub, which is like a YA dark satirical rom-com about a girl who eats people. So I am very, very excited about that. And I have that, I have another YA, I have all of these like products of being an MFA student, where for classes, you have to start all of these novels or start stories or whatever, you draft a whole novel. But then because you're in an MFA program, you're like, okay, put that there, and then I'm going to go to the next class. And so I have a lot of these little projects that I'm looking forward to finishing and putting out, and firmly calling myself an author, who will, once I have time, I'm like, I will teach, I will do that, because that's still is very much like my favorite thing to do, is to just look at somebody else's world that they have poured their heart and soul into and be like, okay, like, how do we get it to work in all the ways you want it to work? Like, how do we really kind of clarify those details that exist in your brain? It feels so good to me.
Final question before we wrap up today. I wanted to ask, what is one thing that you really want readers to take away from your book?
Yeah, so I mean, given the title Ollie in Between, I think I want people to know that when they are in between, when they don't have the answer, they just, know that they need to find some direction, that is like a safe, normal, completely acceptable place to sit. And not only that, we sit there more often than we sit at any end point in any journey. So I'd love, particularly queer readers, but really anybody, to take away a sense of um, being able to exhale when you're presented with many options and you cannot figure out exactly which one is right for you. That sitting there is an excellent choice.
I think it's also one of the things that your book helps bring to the table is having those other options, having those other types of books that people can look at. So it's not just the Judy Blume from a long time ago, but it's also, these are my experiences. These are a diverse world of experiences where everybody has a different experience, and they also have an opportunity to read those different types of books as they come out.
Right, and the value of being seen not just as a secondary character in a book, or not just as a conversation that you're hearing, and especially in the world we live in now, we're so surrounded by conversations about, our identity, our gender, our race, really, so many parts of ourselves are externally, circulating. And I think that kids, particularly kids, but adults as well, benefit from having a moment to sit in what is like an insulated space. And a novel is an insulated space where you can process diversity, process your own experiences, process other people's experiences without that, external opinion and without that input. And you can find for yourself what feels good. And if you know that you're relating to something, even if it's terrifying in the world right now, that you can read that somebody else has put that there, like some person who felt a way that you're feeling now has put this into the world. They've made it, and that voice is valid, and you can sit in those insulated spaces and be safe. I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, and something I believe we were talking about a little bit earlier, before we got into this call was that yeah, the noise is so loud right now from the people who are really angry and aggressive and judgmental. But it's loud because there's also a large wellspring of support that's been coming out more and
Right.
more in the past decade. More books are getting published, more people are coming out and being more supportive in public to give those support. And that's why you also have that loud voice of rejection, but it's because
Right,
there's also
right.
more support as well.
Yeah, and like we were saying, like the hate is a founded thing. The hate, whether everyone has been aware of it or not, trans people have been hearing the hate for decades and decades. It's not, the hate isn't new, and what is new is the support, is the access to content, is the access to people online, people talking positively about their identities. And the increase in hate is a proportionate and direct response to the fact that the love is there. And so I think these stories become really important because they remind us that that love is there, and it is loud, and it is so much more important than any of the negative stuff that people are going to say about it, even if that negative stuff is impactful. um, that it is, again, it is a proportionate response to something really beautiful.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this week's episode of Lindsey Byrd in Writing is Hard. Jess Callans' book, Ollie in Between, is currently available. Check out the description for more details on how to buy. If you're interested in this content, please do like, share, and subscribe so we can keep making you more. And as always, stay happy and healthy. Bye for now.